Well, let's go ahead and get started. Rao, are you here?
Yeah, I am. Let me share the link to the document. There it is in the chat, the current community update. Okay, I think everybody should be able to see community update 118. Right now, 0924 is the current release on the observer nodes. And I say observer nodes because we have actually 2-3 different versions going on. So I will spend a little bit of time talking about what those different ones are. Like I said in the last couple of sessions, our intention is to minimize changes to the mainnet validator nodes, but go ahead, update the observer nodes, which are being used quite significantly by the exchanges, or quite a bit by the exchanges at this point in time. So there are changes occurring in the observer nodes and reporting API. So we have a lot quicker updates on the observer nodes. So that's how come 0924 is there on the observer nodes. But what we noticed is that some of the improvements we did for the 0924 and are also helpful on the validator nodes. So we went ahead and released the 0923 LTS, which is the version now that's running on the mainnet validators. So it has a couple of the improvements from the 0924 branch, and I'll speak to that shortly. Separately, we have 0925 as the main version update for both observers and validator nodes on the mainnet. So that's also very close to being released. We're testing it in the testnet right now. And I think there are a couple of issues that they found that they're fixing. So it should be making it to the mainnet soon, the 0925. That's kind of the state of the releases at this point in time. And I'll speak to what's in those in a little bit of more detail now. So 0923 LTS, which is the mainnet validator version running currently, it has the improved network messaging. That's the pull request 2902, as well as there's a new API function to get blocks by height. And there are improvements in the block store performance. What we are doing now is that in the past, the whole block data would be iterated over to find something. Now we just do hashes and then go to the full block data only when we need it to, So quite a bit of, we have not actually quantified the improvement, but I would say in the last few days, we probably added about 8,000 blocks or so on the network. But we have not, I have not quantified that because we're just really trying to see whether there's an improvement from something and what other interactions that might have with that. So we're just focused on that. We have not really looked at quantifying the performance improvement, but it seems to me that there has been performance improvement on the network in terms of blocks being created per day. Now, one of the things also that is going on, as the MXC has gone live last week, and they have been doing transactions, deposits, transactions. I think they have a competition going for who does the most number of transactions type of a thing. So in a way, it's giving us the first real life volume testing on the mainnet. And as is to be expected, we are discovering things when that happens. excuse me for a second. So, and as we find those issues, we're resolving them. So that's kind of what the team is working on. They worked quite hard over the weekend to get a bunch of these issues resolved. Also, as we improve performance in some areas, some of the things we had not discovered when the network is too slow is they're beginning to show up. So we're addressing those also. So that's where most of the effort, I would say more than half of the effort last week went into. And we're, of course, continuing to work on this, finishing up the last finalized block PR, and there's work being done there, and improving the block store is the other kind of a related piece to that. So that's kind of what the team has been working on. Let me see if there's anything else I want to say on these. The Node.js API that had recently been released and is being used by the Exchange quite extensively, that actually is completed. There's a mistake here about PR being ready and be reviewed, but I'll take it out later. What we're doing with that is, as the Exchange is using it, if they have new requirements, or if we see that something is not working as well as it could have, either from a performance standpoint or whatever, we're making improvements on that API. That's the other piece of work that's going on. There are a couple of things also we discovered in the process of how the Exchange is using the network. One is that they are always hitting the same node. So, if we have 10 nodes, they are overloading one and others are waiting without work. So, of course, we could put something to load balance in front of the network, but that would become a centralized solution, and we do not want to do that. So we went back to the Exchange and asked them to see if they could load distribute in a fashion they think is reasonable, whether that's round robin or whether that's a randomly select a node out of the 10, whatever makes sense. The thinking being that in future, any client that's using the network would have their own preferences as to which validators they would want to use, whether it's based on some kind of trust metrics or some kind of economics or some kind of performance or some combination thereof. So that's kind of the philosophy, the decentralized use of the network philosophy that we want to push. So that's what we're trying to do there. Another issue we noticed is that sometimes there is a lot of connectivity timeouts or hanging. There's a request for something, but then there's hanging going on. So what we're doing there is that on each of the nodes, we're introducing a gRPC proxy. We're enabling a gRPC proxy in the Nginx so that, first of all, maybe this issue would be partly resolved, but more importantly, for us to actually get log data to see what kind of traffic is going through each node and what kind of behavior that traffic is causing on the node, so that we have better handle on the relationship between the problems and the traffic that's coming in. So that's another thing that we're doing. And all the other stuff with what Gurinder is working on in terms of improving the monitoring and spreading it out, that's ongoing, as well as ongoing work on documentation. Like I said last week, it's still right now quite a bit focused on just enabling exchanges to say, here are the best practices, here is how you go about connecting to our network and or running your own node. here is how you use the different API functionality. So that sort of a thing. That's kind of where we are. So that, by and large, is the tech update. And Thomas Lau and others are continuing with the Tuesday teach outs. And on Thursdays at 10 a.m. Eastern, 7 Pacific, there is a tech governance session. And in fact, there are a couple of community members that have already made PRs to be pulled into the system. I know RChain is one of them, and then there's another gentleman also that made updates. So I encourage people that are putting in PRs to especially attend the tech governance so that we can collectively think about how do we make the decision about whether something is a simple PR that can be merged, or whether that needs to be put through or go through the RChain improvement process. Because sometimes what seems like a simple thing might have an impact on the architecture and or may have an interaction with future plans for the platform. So those are some of the considerations we have to deliberate upon as a group and come up with best practices there so that we don't have to undo something as we move forward. So I encourage everyone putting in, especially those putting in PRs, to please attend the tech governance so that we have a dialogue and we have the benefit of your wisdom as to what should be done. So that's what I would say. I think that's the end of my tech update. Does anybody have any questions or comments?
Yeah. Now, last week I did some performance testing, and I tried sending, I sent all the transactions through one node, and then I split it up and I sent equal number of transactions to all nodes at the same time. Now, while there was some difference in the load on the hosts, I had exactly the same number of transactions done in the same time, regardless of whether I sent them all to one node or I spread them out across the nodes. Now, is there some evidence that other than that that's not true?
Well, I mean, it depends on whether you are sending enough to get to like a very high CPU, very high memory type of a situation. So we are seeing sometimes that either the CPU or the memory or both are overloaded with some of the exchange transactions. So sometimes they complete, sometimes it seems like there's a long delay. So to answer your question exactly, we don't know yet. I mean, that is something that we're testing to
actually,
see.
We do know something, right? So in general, whether you send them to one node or you send them to different nodes, that you still have to go through the same consensus communications. So you expect it to be roughly the same under non-stress load conditions. But as soon as you stress out one node because of the load condition, for whatever reason, the memory is not being reclaimed, or there's a hiccup in some thread is being blocked, or anything like that, then that node can be overwhelmed, and then it's not communicating with the other nodes. So that's
I was sending 200 transactions.
Yeah, that's nothing.
Yeah.
Right. If we're sending tens of thousands of transactions, then we're going to start to see, potential issues at this point with the network maturity.
So, but all your transactions completed, Jim?
Yeah, they were all completed in, what was it, about 18 minutes or something.
Okay.
But I think you also have to take when the proposed script was running, Jim. So it really, I think we probably need to take a look at the time that you made the deploy and the time the proposed script kicked in.
Yeah, there was about a 3-minute variation in runs depending on, I guess, when the propose was made.
Yeah, so I think we might need to just look at that. I think that's why you may be seeing the same performance, but that's because we are doing proposes in turn.
Are there any other questions? I would also like to add right now that we are seeing with the usage or increased usage of the mainnet, we're seeing some behavior on the mainnet that's different from what we're seeing on the testnet. So we're trying to understand that a little bit, because sometimes some nodes, typically one node in the network would get a lot of resource consumption. And we're trying to figure that out as to why that's happened that way. But anyway, so are there any other questions? If not, I can turn it over to Greg.
I have a quick question. I brought it up like before about solving like the issue that all the transactions kind of go into one node. And since you don't want to introduce like another centralized entity like a load balancer, shouldn't we come up with like some sort of algorithm that kind of selects certain validators at certain times and kind of prevents blocks from being deployed for certain nodes at certain times? Like, for example, if Exchange kind of looks at the deploy, it should be able to figure out to which validators it should send it to just by running an algorithm.
We are working on an algorithm. Essentially, this is the function of the gossip layer, right?
Oh, okay.
So yeah, so a validator. Well, there are two functions. One is anti-censorship, and the other is distribution of the load. They're a little bit at odds with each other, but in general, if a validator is overloaded, the first thing it should do is gossip the block to other validators.
Okay.
Yeah, that's on the to-do list. Anything else on the technical side of things? Over to you, Greg.
Okay, thanks very much. First things first, I need to remind everyone who has not gotten their tokens off of KuCoin to do so. There's still about 22 million rev, last week I heard, sitting in KuCoin that KuCoin claims they are going to claim for themselves if they aren't taken off by May 8th. No. So I strongly urge whoever has tokens on KuCoin to please go ahead and move them off. If you don't want to store them on a wallet that you control the private key of, you can move them over to MXC. But in general, get your tokens off. It doesn't make sense for KuCoin to walk away with 22 million rev. Any questions or comments about that? Okie doke. Moving on, the board had its regular meeting yesterday. One of the things that we looked at was the communications charter, the charter for the communications committee. Several of the board members had not seen the charter prior to that meeting. And so any deliberation on the charter was postponed to next week, so that gives the board a chance to actually review the charter. In general, things that the board is going to vote on, there has to be some notice that some kind of informational notice. So I know that there are some people who've been working hard on the communications committee charter who are a little frustrated, but not all the board members are apprised of the work in the communications, the nascent communications committee. So there has to be a period of becoming informed. Any questions or comments on that? Okay, then moving on, we have another issue that's related to communications that has to do with the use of the RChain logo and the RChain name, because these are brand and trademarks, and we have the right to protect them. So any channel that attempts to use the RChain logo or just the word RChain, such as the Telegram RChain community, they have to come to the co-op for permission to use those brand elements. And what we want to do is we want to support a decentralized, development of the ecosystem. At the same time, we're very, very sensitive to the fact that there are obligations and liabilities that come with, running the network. It's not all unicorns, rainbows, and roses, as we've seen with the recent lawsuit from Michael Roop, right? So the co-op can become the target of unwanted legal action, even if the co-op has no engagement. The engagement is entirely through a third party. So that should be a sobering fact for people who want to use the RChain brand. What we need to do is to craft some kind of disclaimer or language for those communication channels that want to use the RChain brand that are not officially overseen by the cooperative. So one of the things that we were thinking about was throwing it out to the community to help get some sense of what we might want to say in terms of disclaimer and oversight with respect to third-party communication channels. So let me just stop there and see if that makes sense to folks and see if there are any questions or comments about that.
I think part of the idea here is to disambiguate so that when people are looking at something that says RChain, that they know who's speaking. If it's something that's official from the co-op or from some other group that's perhaps just creating an application on the platform.
Any thoughts? Anybody have any concerns?
Maybe in the future there can be two different logos, like one for RChain and then one for like community related RChain things. Just an idea. Like what Ian said.
Yeah, well, what we had originally, what we contracted with Gervin to do was to actually develop a pattern language so that people could come up with logos which were their own but instantly recognizable as inside the RChain family. So we're not there yet.
Yeah. Okay, well that was my idea too.
So we're not there yet, but what would be awesome is to for any party that wants to use RChain as a part of their communication channel stuff, their branding or or banner, whatever then they need to they need to have a disclaimer, and the co-op also has to have a certain amount of oversight with respect to any thing they might say about RChain, because otherwise,
who should people go to if they have a question about this?
Well, I mean, hopefully, something like a communications committee would be an ideal place for guidance. Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, at this stage, the co-op has to set up the guidance for how the mark is used, and then some agreement that anyone who's using that RChain mark, they have to get the permission from the co-op, and then if they use it poorly, then has to be withdrawn. So it is going to take setting up those agreements, and then maybe setting up a website where people can apply to use it. But this is still just in the makings right now. So anyone who wants to give some input and help solve this, then please get on Discord, and we hope to get this communications committee going to figure all this out.
Yeah, I just want to add that if we don't enforce some of these things, there is real risk of either phishing type of attacks or scams or whatever being run without people realizing that it's not from RChain, but somebody claiming to be affiliated with RChain.
And that's already happened. Yeah, we've already seen that, right? On Twitter, there was a long thread in which someone presented fairly compelling evidence that they had been phished by someone claiming to be me and representing RChain, when in fact it was not me. And so we have to be really, really careful to make sure that there's good framework and guidance around the use of the mark and the use of anything co-op and official.
We just saw Daryl found some more phishing today on there was a Facebook post that appeared to come from the co-op saying that something about the stimulus package. So but beyond just the phishing, the co-op needs to defend its trademark. Otherwise, you have cases where, like with there's a Ravane on KuCoin that is trying to use the REV, which is also trademarked by the co-op.
Cool.
Yeah, I think maybe just thinking out loud here, it seems like the co-op could just potentially improve the places where information is posted and stuff, so that like when people see something that is from RChain, like they really know. And I think that instead of thinking about trying to catch everybody else that's trying to imitate RChain for nefarious purposes, maybe another way to look at it in tandem with that would be to just make sure that our official correspondence, wherever it is, looks and feels and sounds as professional and legitimate as possible. Do you know what I mean? So that there's really a more stark difference, which might be tricky in the beginning, but does that make sense?
Sure, that makes sense, but it's not a. I mean, it's something that we should be doing, but it's not a solution to the ultimate problem. The problem is that we want there to be third parties who feel comfortable and confident talking about RChain front and center in their offering to the community. But we also want that to be consistent with what the co-op's message and the co-op's goals, and not to get us into any trouble. Right. So Pythia was a really good example of a organization that got the co-op into a lot of hot water. Right. And so we don't want to work with organizations that aren't willing to engage according to various guidelines.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's understood. And I'll think more on this.
Okay. Okay, so let's see. Is there anything else, Ian, anything else we wanted to talk about that we can talk about?
Yeah, I just dropped
yes.
something in the chat.
Right, so remember to vote on the ideation DAP ideas. I believe there's good information in Discord about how to cast your votes. This has been a very successful effort so far, with generating a lot of ideas and a lot of engagement. And we'd like the community to step up and give us some their feedback about which ones they think are the best, because there are rev rewards associated with those with the winners of the ideation hackathon. So don't forget to do that. Any questions or comments about that? All right. I think that about does it for this week, unless there are any questions, comments, concerns before we close the meeting.
There's no update from the disaster relief applications, was there?
I'll talk about that on the Friday.
Okay, great.
Call. Yeah. Awesome. Thanks, folks. Everyone, stay safe, stay healthy, and be seeing you in the interwebs. Ciao.